welcome back to another episode of A to the Show, guys. Today we have Dr. Bruce Perry, world-renowned psychiatrist, and here to tell us about basically all the information he can provide us with, how to be a better parent, how to be a better human as well. So maybe we can just start from there, start with the basics. How does a person actually act as a better human, in your opinion?
Wow, that's a big question. There's a couple major folks who've written books about that.
Of course. But we want your opinion for this situation.
Sure. I think one of the fundamental characteristics of a good person is someone who is open-minded and kind and recognizes that the way they see the world is necessarily going to be impacted by these distorting lenses, right? Everybody views the world through their own experiences. And I think the more you learn that there are a lot of different pathways through life, and that you will share many, many, many same values and wishes and desires and hopes with other people, and yet you still may have very different views of how the world works. And I think as long as we are able to keep that in mind and look for the commonality in each other and recognize that the power of being in connection, I think you'll be a good human being. I think we start sort of straying from that when we get rigid in what we think, to the degree that we other people. In other words, we think that we're the special people. My worldview is the only worldview there is, and you are not one of us, or you're not like me. And I think that othering thing, there's a neurobiology that underlies that.
Okay.
And it really is something that I think humanity, the humanness that we have the potential to evolve and develop during our lifetimes, has to really spend a lot of time keeping that part of us in check. Because it's, as you know, look at the current political climate. Look at what's going on out in the world.
A lot of hatred.
Tons of
hatred.
Yeah, lots of hatred, lots of fear of other people, lots of fear of other ideas, and sort of the reactions they're not humane reactions. They're, and I think that's when we get away from the goodness in us being humans, is when we are. When we slip away and sort of think that we're, us, our little group is it, and others are not.
Well, part of that comes from in grouping too. People want to defend their tribe. People want to, think of their group and want to help themselves at the detriment of other people.
Absolutely. I mean, it really, one of the there's this sort of this fundamental biological stuff in all species that helps us essentially monitor the world and do things that are perceived to be necessary for surviving and thriving of you and your people, your family, your group. And unfortunately, if you are, human beings, that our major predators and our major, if you will, risk factor out in the natural world, that was another species aside from infectious bacteria and viruses, were other human beings. And so we have this underlying neurobiology of being suspicious of that other tribe, that other clan. They don't look like us, they don't talk like us, they don't think like us. If you run into them out on the savannah, they're just as likely to compete with you, to harm you, as they are to help you and trade with you. So there's this initial defensiveness when we run into things that are not familiar. And unfortunately, when we're in this sort of semi-defensive state, we're much more concrete in the way we think. We're much less flexible and abstract. We're much less reflective about the potential that could happen if we see this person as a value as opposed to a threat. And now, in the interest, I think the real positive thing happens when two people or groups that are very different have some sort of translational opportunity where there can be opportunities to spend time with each other, build real connections and relationships, and ultimately what was once unfamiliar becomes familiar and known and valued. But that takes time. And again, of course, we structure our communities and our communities of faith and everything that we do, the way we live together, we tend to want to be with people that are like us. And, again, there's value to that. Is a sense of familiarity and safety. But I think sometimes you can get too closed in on your own views and pretty soon the echo chamber of what everybody else is saying makes us vulnerable to othering. And social media does that really, really well, right? The algorithms of social media, you start clicking on certain things, pretty soon all you see is stuff that reinforces your views about those people or that president or this party or whatever. And I think that we're in a really interesting time in history where we're going to have to learn how to be very aware of that and help particularly our children not become completely swept up with some of that stuff.
Wow. In your books, you describe that connection is one of the main aspects for us to grow as people and become more empathetic and become better people. There's a huge crisis of loneliness amongst especially young men, but everyone young. And a lot of people who are lonely, they become chronically online. They don't go outside. They don't talk to, people they're interested in dating. And they just go into these online chat forums, and politics becomes their religion, or, sports becomes their tribe, and gambling becomes their tribe or something like that. So what advice do you have to those people?
Well, Ali, I think one of the things that I'm old, right? I'm older than you guys, and so I don't want to sound like an old fart. Back in the day, but I was lucky enough to grow up when I didn't have all of those temptations, because it's very hard to not use new technology, and I do think I actually love technology. I mean, look at us right now. We're in completely different places, having a conversation. We can think together. We can get to know each other a little bit. That's all positive stuff. And then you're going to be able to use this digital forum to communicate to lots of people. That's a really positive thing. So I never like to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I don't think we should vilify social media or vilify these technologies. I think we just need to learn how to use them in moderate ways. And there are efforts underway that are doing that. The dilemma is, and let me cough for a minute.
Yeah, go for it. Mute yourself. Cough. It's winter.
Excuse me. A real dilemma about that, however, is that, as you pointed out, there are more and more and more people who are living away from other folks. I mean, I just saw a statistic the other day where in some urban areas in the United States and in Japan and in Western Europe, over 60% of the population lives alone. And
wow.
Which is
like one person in their own apartment, completely isolated. Wow.
So we're talking about a lot of urban areas, so, the impact of that, I think, is not really appreciated. that human beings really are, we're very social creatures, and it's good for us to be around other people, to have meals with people, to have conversations with people, to do things
Hmm.
with people, go to movies, play cards, do whatever we do. But the number of opportunities for that has been plummeting, 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 plummeting. And so there's this hunger to be connected. And this sort of happened at the same time that we developed the technology where we could get, oh, I can be connected to grandma, I can be connected to you, I can be connected to people, but it's a different form of connection. And it
Hmm.
really causes something different in your brain when you read a text as opposed to when you hear those words from a person right across from you. And so it's almost like relational junk food. There's this, there's this sense that you ate when you eat Doritos, but nutritionally, it doesn't really meet your fundamental needs nutritionally. There's a sense that you've been connected when you've been online for all this and participating in some chat thing. But the truth is, it doesn't meet your fundamental relational needs. So you walk away still with this relational longing to be connected. And I don't think that we're addressing that adequately in our culture. There are many, 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 as you point out, individuals who end up, because of the circumstances of their life, they might have a night watchman job and they might not be very socially skilled and they have bad self-esteem and they end up spending a lot of time in front of a screen, and they're highly vulnerable to these algorithms that pull them into a sense of being connected, but it's kind of this false connection. You're really not truly connected to people. And I think that that's a huge problem. I think that's a huge problem. And I wish I knew how to fix it. Um, It'll be interesting to see what happens in Australia. As you know,
Yeah.
Australia has
Yeah.
recently passed a ban on social media access to kids under 16,
Wow.
and something that will never happen in the U.S. But
Definitely not.
God forbid we curtail any freedom.
But no,
But it'll be
that's
interesting to see. I really do think that we're going to need to figure out how to handle this stuff. And interestingly enough, and I think that the way we can really ultimately begin to address this is by using those technologies that we're worried about. So, like this podcast has the ability to reach all kinds of people,
Right.
and communicate about that and stimulate thinking about that. Whereas if we just sat in our typical ivory tower and had our white paper consensus and the kind of the typical BS that academics do, that wouldn't reach anybody, let alone the people that need to be heard, right? Or need to hear this. So I applaud you for your efforts to do this, to kind of educate people about these things using these new technologies. But I don't know what do you guys you guys have your finger on the pulse with this stuff. What are you seeing out there?
um, for me personally. When I was looking into it, so I've definitely seen like what it's doing to kids in public schools in the U.S. And when I was reading about it, I've also seen like a few teachers talk about it, how their reaction to being removed from the devices, how it mimics symptoms of like withdrawal symptoms. And I was
Yeah,
thinking, if this is happening in schools, that means they're using the phone most of the time when they're not in school or even in their breaks and stuff.
yeah,
Um, Me currently, I live in Lebanon, so we also do have that. I see it, for example, with my younger cousins. Whenever we're hanging out in a family gathering, I see them like on their devices, and when they want to try to connect with me or like talk to me, they show me something on their phone instead of try to bring up a conversation, like just from something else.
yeah,
And I remember when I was younger, I didn't do that. If it's with my friends or my cousin, we would like, we'd talk about stuff. Sometimes we'd have like, okay, we'd have video games and then talk about life while we're just playing video games. But other times we'd just be sitting together and like talking about random stuff, like you know how young guys just like start creating theories and plans and
Okay.
that never necessarily have to happen.
Right.
But you talk, which is I think the crucial thing when it comes to connectivity. And it's
Absolutely.
also
Absolutely.
non with talking and then like listening as well. Listening is really important, I would say. Something This is something I feel like a lot of people are not doing well. They're
No
hearing
kidding.
but not listening.
So true. So true. I think again, what you're describing is not an unfamiliar scene in the U.S. as well. I mean, you
Hmm.
can go out to a restaurant and you'll see a family. Every one of them is on their own device. Instead of
Yeah.
having any conversation, they're on their own device, and there'll be times when they communicate across the table by texting.
Hmm.
No.
It's like, well, it's crazy. And part of what has to happen, and again, I talk about this like I'm perfect. I do the same thing. I mean, I will catch myself checking my phone in when I'm with my grandkids or my family, and
Mm,
it's like, wow, I shouldn't do that because I'm really not present for them when I do that with my phone. So
right.
over time, what I think we'll get better at, and I think I mean, the great thing about human beings is we solve problems. The
Hmm.
problem is
Hmm.
sometimes it takes a long time to solve the problems. And but one of the things that we'll figure out ultimately is there will be certain sort of cultural norms and acceptable practices about when to have a phone, when not to have a phone, how to use
Hmm.
the phone. We'll develop sort of that etiquette, and it's emerging, but it takes a while for that. So there's people that say no phones in our home except in a certain space, no
Right.
phones at dinner. I've gone to meetings at places where you just hand in your phone.
Nice.
You
Right.
just
Right.
and so there are little things are emerging, and
Hmm.
I think we'll get there, but we're along the way. We're going to see a lot of very marginalized, disenfranchised, angry individuals
Hmm.
who, many of them will turn that inwardly on themselves,
Hmm.
but some of them will turn that to the external world. And I think that some of I don't want to make a generalization, but a lot of the people who have taken up a gun and gone someplace and shot it up are examples of these marginalized kind of lonely individuals who kind of get into this weird echo chamber in their head about the world,
Yes.
and then they get angry and resentful, and it leads to some of these terrible actions.
I completely agree with the echo chambers about like in your head. It's I would say another word for it maybe is overthinking, but gone to like an extreme situation, obviously. I remember I once watched this TED talk about um, this person was talking about how many thoughts you have per day, and they were saying you have like around maybe 50,000 thoughts a day,
Mm,
something like that, and 10,000 of them are positive. So only 20% of the thoughts you have in a day are positive, while the rest are negative. So 80% of your thoughts per day are negative. So if you dwell on those, and over time they just keep, festering and then
yeah,
growing, and then eventually you start thinking these are real, you might end up, yes, maybe committing something that you didn't want to do in the first place. Uh, like you said, the echo chamber.
yeah.
So, what would you recommend for people to, what tactics or strategies should they have to possibly avoid this situation so that they don't
Yeah,
go deep into these echo chambers?
that's we think about this as a group. I work in a sort of an interdisciplinary group,
Hmm.
and this is one of the things
Hmm.
that we think about quite a bit. And again, this is sort of our answer to a lot of these things is about relationships. And so one of the
Right.
things about human beings is that we are very relational creatures. And if you're in an environment where there's lots of people who know you and
Mhm.
reflect back at you, hey, you're one of us, good to see you, good work, et cetera, what happens is they're essentially creating the mirror that we internalize. And
Okay.
to your point about that, what's going on in your head, if you're continually getting grandma, grandpa, auntie, coach, teacher, friend who relationally engaging you and helping you feel positive and think of yourself in a good way, and they smiled at me, and then that ratio of good thought, bad thought shifts towards the good.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yes.
And so in an environment of relational poverty, on the other hand, where you don't get any of these powerful relational cues that you belong and that you're one of us. In fact, you might even get the cues that, what are you doing here? You know, you talk
Mhm.
funny. You know, if you're let's say
Yeah.
you've immigrated to the U.S. and you have an accent, people look at you like, where are you from? You know, that's not a relational mirror that's going to make you feel
Mm-hmm.
good. That's going to make you feel marginalized. And so
Right.
if you get that kind of stuff, that balance goes more towards the negative. And so there's the first thing is to be aware of the fact that relational connections with people who know and care and make you feel like you belong are powerful, powerful, powerful experiences. And they have physiological consequences. That literally changes the biology of your body and your brain.
Mhm.
The second thing, and this is one of the great things about the human brain, our cortex, that top part of our brain, has this executive functioning capability where self-talk is, right? You can sort of say, all right, this is what I believe, this is what I know. So when you do sort of like, hey, I know that I'm safe here, I know that I'm a good student, I know that I'm a good whatever, I know that I'm a good person. If you literally engage in positive, intentional thinking about yourself, you can kind of keep that balance in a healthy sort of ratio. The
Mhm.
dilemma is that the ability to use that part of your brain is what we call state dependent.
Mm.
So if you're hungry, thirsty, cold, scared, overwhelmed, humiliated, ashamed in class, that part of your brain that would normally go, they're wrong, I'm not bad, it gets shut down, it gets weaker. And so the power of sort of that positive thinking that is good for you, but the
Right.
ability to do it depends upon an environment where you have enough sense of safety to actually use it, right? So it's
Yeah.
very hard when all day long people are giving you the signals that you don't belong. It's very hard to continually go, yes, I do belong. Yes, I do belong. It's hard. It's exhausting. And you lose the energy to do that. And pretty soon you go, well, maybe I should move. Maybe I should go. Maybe I don't belong here. Maybe I'm not smart enough to go to this school. Maybe I can't learn math. And then once that tipping point comes in that balance, then you're off to that sort of self-hatred, self-judging, self-this
Mhm.
loop, which is a very powerful loop. And, again, back to sort of the biology of the human brain, our brain essentially has as an overriding mandate to keep us alive, right?
Mhm.
So one of the things that it's essentially kind of biased towards either potentially threatening signals or negative experiences. And so it really pays more attention to them than to good experiences. So you can have a teacher can go, really, that's really nice work. And then the next period, a teacher will go, how many times do I have to tell you? I think, you're either going to go to prison or whatever. And so you will never remember the teacher who said to you, that was really good. But for your entire life, you'll remember that third grade
Wow.
teacher who said, you know what, you're going to end up in prison if you keep acting like that.
Our brain is so broken in a way.
That's
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But it's the irony is it's sort of those mechanisms are kind of in place to keep us alive, right? So in the real world, what happens is all animals have this kind of mechanism. Like crows, this is going to sound really bizarre. You're going to think I'm nuts, but crows,
Yes.
right? Crows will come and they'll come around, they'll fly around a dead crow. Or
Okay.
if they see somebody hurt a crow, shoot a crow, kill a crow, they will come and they come around the other crow and they look around and do all this stuff. And everybody, the interpretation of a lot of people is, oh, they're mourning the other crow. No, they're studying what happened. They're like little crow CSIs, and so they remember all of the circumstances that led to this crow getting killed, and they remember it.
Wow.
And so they
So that they
literally,
avoid any
if
harm.
they see a person who shot at a crow and it got killed, they will, for the rest of the life of that person, caw, 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 and attack and dive bomb and do all kinds of stuff. Pretty cool, right? So in their brain, they're looking, and we do the same thing. We're looking for what dangers, what hurt, what's bad, what's risky, and we internalize it. And the heartbreaking thing is, if kind of hearkening back to our earlier conversation, is if when you're trying to make sense out of the world, which your brain is doing all the time, that balance is distorted by all of these external mirrors that telling you that you're dumb, you're bad, you don't belong here, you're the wrong skin color, you're the wrong body type, whatever it is. We start to internalize that. And then we start to really feed some of the things that happen around self-loathing and depression, and kind of it pushes us over into a much more vulnerable neurobiology. And however, the antidote to all of this stuff is connection to family, community, culture. Those are the anchors that help you stay relationally connected and stable. And anyway,
fantastic. No, we can keep going on. I wanted to show you this printout I did of a healthy brain under stress. Is it true that your brain kind of like shrinks when it's under stress like that?
Yeah, it's interesting. The brain changes, right? There's certain parts of the brain do have volumetric changes under acute stress, and then they can restore those volumetric changes. There will be volumetric changes in the brain when you run a marathon.
Oh, wow.
Which is a huge stressor to the body. I mean, it doesn't feel like I'm getting traumatized, but it's a stressor to your body to run 26 miles.
You can agree.
And so you do get shrinkage in certain nuclei in the brain. And so that 2 points there.
Wait, hold up. So what you're saying is this vast trend of all these people who are now running marathons and starting to do all of these running things are actually becoming dumber?
No. Well, your brain, even though the anatomy shrinks, it's not clear that changes functionally, right? So, and the shrinkage can be temporary. It can be like a 4-day change.
I see.
Okay.
And so the point I was going to make is that what this is demonstrating is this remarkable adaptability of the brain to sort of adapt to and compensate for stressors. And then sometimes the stressors can be so prolonged that the ability to kind of recover is diminished. And then you will get changes that persist. And this is part of what we see with certain kinds of traumatic experiences. The other thing that's kind of the work that we do is a lot of it is looking at when those stressors take place during development. Right. Because there's so much happening during development, if you mess that up a little bit, even temporarily, even like the 2-day thing that you do for a marathon, that can have consequences that echo in later months. And so this is why we think the timing of traumatic experience is so important. That it's a little bit, we always use the analogy of building a house. So if in the middle of building the house, you're digging, you put in the foundation, you put in the pillars, all of a sudden there's a disruption in the delivery of services, and you can't get quite the exact kind of cement that you want, and you have to change the percentage a little bit, so it's a little bit structurally weaker, and you put that in, that's going to be fine if you build the second story and the third story But the fourth story is going to be too much weight for that. And it will essentially, when you get into adolescence, you're going to have this kind of overwhelming duress on a system that was just fragilely organized. And all of a sudden, boom, first onset presentation of problem A, B, C, D. And this is what we think is the relationship between developmental stressors and vulnerability to schizophrenia, for example. And so that, and again, I'm not saying that's the only route to that, but that's one of the things that happens with developmental trauma, is that it really can cause a disruption in this normal sequence of organization that happens very rapidly.
Well, and you wouldn't even know about it too, is the thing. Something that happened to you when you were a kid, you weren't even aware of. 20 years later, you're getting mad at the waiter, yelling at them, and you don't even know where that emotion, reaction, anger came from.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, it really, and I don't want to focus too much on this, even though I think it's such an important thing. It turns out that just even taking care of a young family when the baby is in utero and in the first couple months of life, if you help them have housing stability, nutritional stability, sort of minimize relational chaos, and then this child after that goes into sort of this, you know, chaotic mess, they'll have better outcomes than kids who have, you know, intrauterine threat to the mother, a little bit of housing instability, a little bit of stress and distress early in life, and then all of a sudden their life is perfect.
I see.
They're going to have worse outcomes.
Wow. Because it's so, when they were so young, when they were imprinted with these.
Exactly. It's so fundamentally can impact these foundational systems that it has consequences.
If I were a policymaker, then I would think that we should give every young family financial support, some housing support, food support, to make sure that these young developing kids aren't exposed to all these stressors that we have to deal with. I mean, just because you're a parent doesn't mean you don't have to pay rent, you don't have to work, you have to adapt to the ever-changing job market, uncertainty of the future. All these things are placed upon you, and you have to raise a kid. No wonder it's near impossible for people to raise kids nowadays.
Yeah, no, and I agree with you completely about the policymaking thing. And the interesting thing is we've been doing this for 30 years, trying to communicate these concepts to policymakers. And, you know, some of the most compelling work has come from James Heckman, who's a Nobel laureate economist, who studied return on investment for doing exactly what you said, Ali, providing these economically stable, high quality early childhood resources, and then looking at outcomes. And the best return on investment for educational activities are high quality early childhood programs for highest at risk families. Wow. And it literally parallels exactly the return on investment parallels exactly the curve of how the brain develops and organizes and the rate of change in these systems. So the more changeable, the more sort of actively dynamic it is, the more malleable it is, and the more it will benefit from that kind of stuff. And the older you get, like by the time you're 13, 14, 15, which is, I'm not saying don't invest, but it's a time when the brain is not as malleable as in utero. And so we have to spend so much more money. We have to have much more developmentally appropriate and targeted interventions, which doesn't happen all the time. And then we have to have many, 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 many more repetitions to kind of get to the same outcomes. So it really, to your earlier point, it really would be policy wisdom to invest in high quality early childhood supports and care for families. And there's, again, there is so much good data about that. It's just that I think the advocacy efforts to get policymakers to focus on that are hindered by the fact that the families that would benefit most from this are the most
Mm-hmm.
disenfranchised, the least politically powerful, and of course, children and baby. None of children don't vote, so they care
That's
about
true.
the population of adults who are already past all that,
Mm-hmm.
and they're interested in the chicken farm subsidies and whatever other stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So
It's kind of hard
anyway,
because, in one sense, you feel helpless that you can't change the world, but in another sense, I feel empowered that I have this knowledge and information for myself, and that I can at least use it to the benefit of me, the people I love, my family. Um, so it's that mixed bag, but I do wish that everyone would have access to this information and knowledge and resources that they desperately need. And it feels like the world is like,
yeah,
it's like us fighting the world in so many different ways. Like I wanted to bring up online gambling. That's a big thing that's trending and growing, and
yeah,
everywhere you go
boy,
outside, you see ads
brutal.
for it. You can't watch a sports game without
It's brutal.
seeing gambling. iPhone
Yeah,
games, and they gamify it and make it
yeah.
fun.
The funny,
What's that doing to our brains?
I here's one of the challenges I think is that money drives everything. I hate to say
Mm-hmm.
it, but even when you let people know that this is really not good for people, that it ultimately can really harm families with somebody who's got a gambling addiction, um, there's so much money in it that the people that make all these decisions pretty much ignore all that stuff. But there's really, I mean, I saw a segment on 60 Minutes a while
Mm-hmm.
ago, maybe it was a couple of years ago, but it was about this very issue and that how incredibly addicting the algorithms for online gambling have been set up to be. They're literally organized to intentionally get people that are vulnerable to it addicted. Now, the problem is there are a lot of people who have enough self control to just sort of make one big mistake and lose 500 bucks and they're like, I'm not doing that again. Or I'm going to have enough self control to limit it to whatever. But as you and I know, there are some folks that just don't have, they're just organized in a way that they are more vulnerable to that kind of addictive behavior. And sometimes it'll manifest around gambling or around sex or around something else, but their reward neurobiology is a little bit vulnerable to this. And so I guess as a society, we're just throwing them under the bus. I mean,
Oof.
we're basically saying, tough
Wow.
shit, we're going to do it. So, I think it's really sad because I've seen families destroyed by it. And I've seen, high functioning Stanford grad, 6-figure income, literally online gamble their lives and then without the rest of the family knowing, kind of making these, selling assets that they shouldn't have sold, literally driving their family into bankruptcy, and just because of that. And so you know,
And
if there was some other, if somebody came to the market, to the FDA or to, any regulatory body and said, hey, we've invented something that, 80% of the population is going to love it, but 20% of the population is going to completely be destroyed by it. They would never approve it,
mm-hmm.
right? But it's craziness. Do you think that we'd ever allow, even if it was a medication, if it destroyed even 5% of the people that took it? We just would not let it on the market. But
We don't have
it's about
a
money.
regulatory system.
Money is
Yeah,
powerful.
money is powerful at the end. That's what it all comes down to. Saeed?
I wanted, speaking about money, like, what is it about money that's just it's taking control of the way we think and our mindset and the way people, interact with each other, how our social behavior even changes around the concept of just money. I mean, what's the history of our brain development around this concept of just using a currency where it controls us as humans and who
Again,
we
I
are?
mean, you ask very excellent philosophical
Thank you.
Gotta make the people think.
I there is something about us, I think, that is very focused on power and safety. Safety and power
Mm,
for a lot of people go together.
yeah.
And what I find with the people that that I feel, and again, this is my judgment, but how much is enough, right? And I'm
Right.
just as vulnerable as anybody else. I probably could literally, I could live in a different kind of house. I could live at a much lower style of life, lifestyle.
Hmm.
I could stay at the Motel 6 instead of the Hampton
Hmm.
Inn when I travel. We all could probably do stuff like that.
Right.
But there's this interesting sort of gradation. My wife and I talk about this all the time because for a long time when we had kids, we literally qualified as being poor. I mean, we had kids and no income basically, and lived a very different way, and we're
Right.
okay. I mean, but what was helpful for us is that we had some sense that someday I will actually make more money because I'm
Hmm.
becoming a physician. And but I always think about that and I'm like, was I any happier then than I am
Wow.
now? And the answer is I'm happier now. No. Sorry. No.
Fair enough.
I am happier now, but it's not because of what I have. It's because I don't have the fear
Mm,
about making enough to have everybody get something to
Hmm.
eat and make it enough so that my kids could kind of do some of the same things that other kids that he went to school could do. Um, just it was all about a sense of safety. But
right.
after that, the accumulation of money, it becomes almost an abstraction. I mean, and I think one of the things you've probably seen these things about the difference between the most compensated employee
Right.
versus the least compensated frontline. And when I was growing up, it was kind of flat. I mean, there was a difference for sure, but in the
Hmm.
last 20 years, it's literally gone
Hmm.
it's gotten huge, and I don't understand that. I mean, I don't understand why that happens, except that there is, for some people, it's about power. If you have this kind of jet, you want a bigger jet. And I don't think everybody's like that. I do think though there are some people that are like that they can't get enough. And I have you seen the movie The Wolf of
Yes,
Wall
most
Street?
definitely. Hmm.
Yeah.
Can't have
Yeah.
enough.
Yeah, and it just in my head again going back to what we said right at the beginning about humanity, that is not the way I'm put together. But for
Correct.
some reason, those people are. And usually, when I get to know a lot of those folks, many of them feel internally
Mm.
insecure.
Mm,
And there's this longing for more, that now am I good enough? Now do I have enough? Is this I want? And underneath it is more of an insecurity than other things, at least in the few people I've met that are that wealthy. But I don't
so in
know. I
the
mean, I wish I knew more about the way human beings worked. Human beings are
mm,
still, I mean, I've been doing this for a long time and always run into stuff that is kind of confusing for me. And
um
what I do know though is that when I sit down with something or a person where it is confusing and
right.
I get to know them, then I can understand how they got there a lot better.
Yes.
Um, on an individual
Mm-hmm.
basis, right? It's not that I necessarily can say everybody who accumulates money is like this, or everybody who ends up with depression is like this, or everybody who ends up having, these repetitive toxic relationships
Mm-hmm.
is like this. I can't generalize too much, but I can tell you that every single person I've ever sat down with and really listened to your point, Saeed, about listening, where'd you come from? Where'd your family come from? How'd you grow up?
Mm-hmm.
And over time, you begin to see, oh, that kind of makes sense. That's why you made that choice. That's why you went this direction. I get it now. And it's a little bit like, you know, understanding these different trajectories that we can all take is something that I think we all can do. I think the
Mm-hmm.
problem with mental health, we're asked to do this, but we aren't given or compensated for the time it takes to get to know somebody.
Mm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you were asked to
Yeah.
kind of make major decisions about how somebody should be treated and viewed, and we're given a couple hours to get to know them, which is like, that's just not fair.
Because all
So,
their behavior comes from their history. You can have someone that's a very cruel and evil person, and you might not understand the actual what they're doing, but you can understand the traumatic events that led up to them becoming so hateful and doing evil acts. So it's like
yeah.
compassion versus understanding too is I think for us to work as clinicians. I wanted to ask you about
It's
yeah, go ahead. But I wanted to ask you about
I was just going to say that, I think one of the lucky things for me and the way we get to practice is that because we sort of divorced
mhm,
ourselves from the medical economic model, we do give ourselves lots of luxury to kind of get to know folks. It's not yet a practical way for other people to
mhm,
practice necessarily, because there aren't a lot of um, compensation models for that. But we think it's much more effective, And I mean, I used to be when we looked at the effectiveness of our mental health clinics, we'd have long waiting lists. We had kids would come in, like 20% of the people on the waiting list wouldn't show up. Then we'd have, after 3 sessions, people would disappear. And so it was a really inefficient way to engage and treat people. Um, but I think for now, until we can separate the economics from we're kind of stuck with it.
what do you
Mm-hmm.
think of the prison system in the U.S. and how we're dealing with people that have done, let's say, bad things, bad actions? Um, what would your
Crimes.
pro crimes? Yes, what would your approach be to treating them?
Well, I have a friend who's a really well-known forensic psychologist and used to run the mental health programs for the New York State prison system. And he used to say that the largest mental health facility in the United States is the prison system.
Mm,
And so,
Wow.
of course, if you go into the prison system and you do a simple survey of developmental trauma, it's almost like 100% of the
mm-hmm,
people have had pretty significant developmental trauma, exposure
Wow.
to violence, chaos, threat, abandonment, humiliation. And so, again, when it comes to sort of like understanding how they got there, if you sit down and look at their story, you're like, wow, I'm surprised they didn't kill more people. It's it's a lot of horrific stuff happens to some of these folks. On the other hand, a lot of horrific stuff happens to people and they don't end up, in the criminal justice system. So
Mm.
I think when I look at what keeps one group in and another group not, it has to do with whether or not someone had sort of almost a serendipitous relational opportunity during their life where they were able to find and develop a skill that they were able to find a niche, whether it was they were good with cars, or they actually were good in
mm-hmm,
sport, or they were good in band, or there was some place where they could fit and have a relational opportunity that ended up being very healing and protective for them. And the kids that don't get that have a much higher probability of ending up in these sort of poor outcome trajectories. So one of the things I would do basically is I would think differently about how prisons are constructed in terms of how do you provide opportunities for rehabilitation that involve awareness of and sensitivity to some of their developmental trauma. And in cases where it's possible, start to provide some therapeutic opportunities for healing.
I see.
And there's a lot of different ways to do this. And there are examples of it. There are places where they have, they don't really frame it as addressing the mental health needs, but they'll have programs where maltreated dogs will come in and the prisoners will take care of the dogs. And the violence in those units goes way down, and they develop competence and skills. And a lot of them end up, when they leave, going to be vet techs.
Wow.
And so there's examples of how you can do kind of simple, affordable, light touch, but humane activities that allow folks to kind of find meaning, find purpose, be seen as a valuable, it's again, back to Saeed, to the whole thing about who's mirroring you. Like, if all day long, what's mirrored to you is that you're worthless, you're a criminal, you're a scumbag, that person is not going to be easy to rehabilitate, 100%. But if you have a mirror that says, listen, you have a lot of untapped potential, and, you can learn how to read, you can you're really good at art. You've got some skills with your hands. Let's teach you how to work on a car. Let's help you build skill and competence, and help scaffold you back into society in a way that will give you the opportunity to succeed. And again, there are examples of that happening, but there are many more examples of where it's
needed for sure. It could help a larger percentage of the people that are there. I wanted to switch it a bit and talk about artificial intelligence. I'm not sure if you're familiar with these stories that are coming out on the news about people developing anxiety and neurosis from ChatGPT, and committing suicide because of ChatGPT, and killing other people because of AI. And personally, I love using the technology, but part of me thinks, who is creating these algorithms? What are these algorithms doing to my brain without me even knowing about it? Can you expand on that?
Yeah, I actually use AI. I like it. It's helpful for lots of things. We've used it successfully to try and take some of the things that we've written and paraphrase them in sort of at a 7th grade level, and paraphrase them again for 3rd grade level, so we can see how we can improve in communicating to clients and families and stuff. Because as if you spend years and years and years in the medical world, you pretty soon you think everybody, without realizing it, the language you use starts to get really obscure.
Yes, not everyone will understand what you're saying.
So that we've used it for that. I haven't used it. I've seen a little bit about how it's been used as a therapist.
Oof.
Here's the dilemma: is there's something built into not all of them, but almost all of the machine learning models have an element where they want to please the person who's submitting the query. And you can kind of unconsciously, if you give a thumb or not a thumb, you will create your own algorithm for what you want to hear. And pretty soon it ends up being, like we said earlier, it's an internal echo chamber.
Wow.
Right?
You're right.
So you end up getting this super concentration. It's like a distillation process. And if you have some negativity about yourself, and you train the machine learning thing to that, pretty soon, zzz, and Ali, after sitting with patients that are depressed, every time you try to suggest something that's actually realistic and not bad, they'll twist it and they'll move it down to being, well, this and this and this. So they literally, their whole perceptive curve has shifted, so that things that are good are neutral, things that are neutral are bad, and things that are bad are catastrophic. And so they'll build that into, they unconsciously will select that into the AI algorithm. And it can be really a mess. So anyway, but with all that said, I think it's going to be part of the future of mental health service delivery. Certainly with regards to people filling out online forms and then getting, rating scales and then getting an algorithmic cluster of what the machine thinks that you're struggling with. And because the medical economic model wants to make money
and save costs,
back to money, they're going to be happy with that, because that will allow their psychiatrist to see 2 people every half an hour instead of 1 person every 90 minutes. And all of the intake work will be done by a machine. And we're going to see some interesting changes in practice. But
I hate to be so doom and gloom with this pod. I want to end it with a positive note.
All right, positive note.
I want to ask you about what is love doing to our brain, like romantic love, as opposed to like friendship? Is there a difference?
Yeah, I mean, the people that study this, there are sort of different hormonal things when you sort of have this attraction to somebody that is that romantic love thing. And, they'll talk about how it's present in the beginning and that physiological state kind of fades over time. And, there's people speculate about the fact that that's sort of the little bit of extra nudge that we need for pair bonding. And honestly, as a species, we don't care about some of this stuff too much. We just want to make sure you get impregnated and get a few. But we're also concerned as a species with, after the child's born, having support, protection, et cetera, et cetera. So there's kind of a 2-part neurobiology to connection. And so having both the I care for you, I love you, I find value in you, and the I'm really horny part, when they ultimately can work together. And in the beginning, it's kind of like a little bit more balanced in one way. But as long as you have opportunities to have real relational, connections, then you'll end up with both of them working together to create the kind of bond that's really good for the species, which is a bond that creates a protective pair for vulnerable children. And it helps us survive another generation as a species, because, there's saber-toothed tigers out there.
Said, you can go ahead.
I hate to do this, guys, but I've got to stop in like a couple minutes.
Sounds good. Said,
right.
Last question.
I think my questions will be a bit too long, so maybe we'll leave it for another time.
Last
Said, you should go into philosophy, man.
Love that. Last one, quickly, Dr. Perry. So here I have the inverted triangle. Okay. How can we apply this in our daily lives as just young people? Yes. And how can we be regulated? I know you talk about rhythmic and music and stuff like that. So really quick, if you wouldn't mind.
Let me I'll take 1 second on this and talk about it, because I think the most useful component of that teaching heuristic that we use is this recognition that the brain does have this hierarchical organization. And that the top part of our brain is where all the networks involved in thinking and your values and planning and reflection on the past, that's all of that kind of good humane stuff is up there. On the other hand, everything you see and feel and touch and taste and all of the sensory input that comes from your own body and comes from the outside world, the first place it goes is to the lower part of the brain. It doesn't go right to the top. It goes to the lower part of the brain. And so that part of the brain can't tell time, can't really think. It reacts, but it doesn't think. It doesn't cognitively process. And so one of the most useful pieces of information about this and using this is that our brain is organized to basically react before it's organized to think. And as you get older and more mature and more, if you will, regulated, you start to have the capability to use that top part of your brain to basically monitor and moderate the lower parts of the brain, right? So when you're hungry and you're a baby, you just cry. If you're hungry and you're a resident on call, you look at your watch and you go, all right, I'm going to be able to eat in 90 minutes. You want to cry, but you don't cry. You go, all right, I can eat. I can tolerate this feeling of discomfort. And so that's called executive functioning. So executive functioning is when that top part of your brain gets strong enough to kind of contain the feelings and emotions that are coming from lower. And the second part of that that's really, I think, helpful is that if you want to get to that, if you want your words to be heard by your child, or if you want to communicate something to a colleague, to a partner, you have to get to the cortex. And in order to get to the cortex, you have to go through the lower part of the brain. And the lower part of the brain is going to have all kinds of roadblocks for that process if you are stressed. If you're hungry, thirsty, cold, scared, what happens is the availability of your brain becomes like this. You don't have full access to all your cortical capabilities. So the first thing you want to do when you're trying to communicate with your child at the end of the school day is not say, how much homework do you have to do? It's just quietly give them something to eat. Let them play a couple, 30 minutes on a video game to regulate. And then you go, let's go over your homework when they're regulated and they can hear you. Because if you talk to them about like that when they're dysregulated, they're going to blow up. So we talk about this, the sequence of engagement: regulate, relate, and then reason. And if you adhere to that sequence, you will usually be pretty successful.
Fantastic. Thanks. A great place to end it. Thank you so much, Dr. Perry.
Yes.
My pleasure.
Appreciate it.
Thank you guys for watching another episode of A2 the Show.
We're out.
You guys know how we
Check
sign
out
up.
the books. We're out of here. Thank you, Dr. Perry. Appreciate your time.
Bye.